Right, so on my right, arguing for the motion, is City, and on my left, arguing against the motion are Kingston. So same rules, 2 minutes per individual, and then 1 minute re-rebuttal, if you like, at the very end per team. So, first speaker from City, please.
Thank you. I'd like to present two arguments that Syria, or that in the light of the Syria crisis and the Security Council's response to it, the UN Security Council can no longer be viewed as relevant. Firstly, the Security Council's response to the situation in Syria illustrates the impotence of the Security Council as compared to other more effective means of enforcing international security. The factual background to this debate is that the Security Council failed to pass a resolution to confront the Assad regime's use of chemical weapons against its own people. This is not surprising, given the long history of impotence and inaction displayed by the Security Council. Only twice in its history has it mandated action against an aggressor nation, the two occasions being in the Korean War and in the First Gulf War. Furthermore, notable examples of inaction, complete inaction, include crisis in Rwanda, the genocide in Rwanda, and the Darfur crisis. And those two examples of Security Council inaction are infamous. Indeed, other means of enforcing international security have proved more effective, and the Syria crisis is a perfect example of that. Unilateral diplomacy between the Russians and Syria provided the resolution in that case. My second argument is that the Syria situation has illustrated perfectly how the veto system renders the Security Council toothless. The veto allows only one unwilling member of the permanent 5 members of the Security Council to hold the UN hostage while individuals on the ground needing intervention suffer and their calls aren't heeded. It was thought that after the Cold War this wouldn't prove so problematic as tensions between the East and the West thawed. However, the Syria situation is an example of one of many examples of inaction since the Cold War, including in Burma and Georgia, where the Council has failed to act. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to oppose the notion of the lack of pertinence of the UN Security Council, in the sense that it has become stigmatized prior for certain occurrences in Afghanistan and Iraq, but now we can see it takes a different stance, in the sense that it's slightly more rational. Coming to his point, my learned colleague, the resolution 2118 in the UN Security Council ensured that as from the 27th of September 2013, the chemical weapons of Syria were to be remanded and subsequently destroyed in a contained manner till the date of 30th of June 2014, which was the ultimatum. In this sense, we can see the UN Security Council is still relevant in maintaining peace in the Middle East, especially where we have seen there's many volatile occurrences, especially here in Syria, where there's been a one-party state since 1963. We can see that in this sense, the UN Security Council still maintains pertinence and is definitely not irrelevant. The UN Security Council is moving away from the stigma and is taking a slightly more rational stance by taking the notion, or abiding by the notion, or adhering to the notion of actually remanding weapons rather than intervening militarily, as they have in the past. We can identify that despite the UN Security Council having a lot of, or an extensive amount of volatility within itself, they're somewhat able to overcome those dire problems, and they are definitely posing rational alternatives behind the argument, or behind preventing dichotomy within Syria. Therefore, I would like to once again reiterate how Resolution 2118 was actually created by the UN Security Council as from the 27th of September 2013, and this definitely does prove that the UN Security Council is still pertinent and still continues to ensure harmony in a global scale. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to begin by rebutting the assertion that the UN Security Council's passing of a resolution with regard to the chemical weapons in Syria affirms its relevance. Far from it, for the actual initiation of the process to deal with the problem of chemical weapons in Syria was instigated external to the legal framework provided by the UN Security Council. I'll return to my key arguments. There are three reasons why the Security Council is irrelevant to the maintenance of international security. It no longer reflects the political powers at play in the world today. It is a battleground for competing political interests, and it is not regarded as an authority by individual nations. The lack of meaningful regional representation is crucial in undermining its legitimacy as a relevant custodian of international security. Decisions are limited to only 5 permanent members. Continents like Africa and Latin America do not have a permanent voice. Europe is overrepresented and Asia severely underrepresented. This interplays with the problem of the veto that my colleague mentioned earlier. It exacerbates the bias that the veto allows to enter into play. It illustrates the domination of politics over and above international security interests. For some, political interests can carry more weight than others simply because a country has an ally among the permanent 5 members. Finally, its status as irrelevant to the protection of international security is illustrated in the fact that the legal framework it provides is frequently circumvented or disregarded by individual nations. Examples include the US-led invasion of Iraq and the Kosovo bombings. Ultimately, its status as a non-representative, outdated body, which is nothing more than a tool for the foreign diplomacy policies of individual states, is reflected in the disregard for its legal authority. Thank you.
I'll be arguing against the notion that the UN Security Council is irrelevant. I'm basically arguing 2 points. One of the main ones is that regional bodies, specifically the Arab League and the Organisation of Islamic Cooperation, are not helping the situation, and also the UN Security Council does not wish to infringe on national sovereignty of the state. My first point, the regional bodies, specifically, as I said, the Arab League and the Organisation of Islamic Cooperation, have decided that they cannot help this and have shunned Syria, and they therefore need somebody to essentially take control for them. They need a bigger body who will take a decision. They need the Security Council to intervene, to impose sanctions and mandate military intervention, which it has done. The Security Council still bears in mind what the regional bodies want and what they've suggested, so is not trying to be a world police as such. However, they are helping where the regional bodies cannot do as such. My second point is that the Security Council is reluctant to intervene as it's a civil issue, as Russia and China have stated, who are clearly superpowers in the world. They state that they have respect for sovereignty, and therefore they do not wish to intervene as they do not want to impede on Syria's national identity. It's clearly obvious that the situation in Syria is extremely complex. There's been atrocities by both sides. There's no denying that at all. However, the fact that Russia and China, 2 very, very powerful members of the world community, do not wish to intervene clearly states a lot. To summarise, we believe that the Security Council is not irrelevant. However, it can obviously be done, there can be things done to reform it, but that's a completely different debate completely.
In my last minute, I'd like to make 3 points by way of rebuttal. The first point I'd like to make is I was interested that my colleague used the example of the Syria crisis as an example of the Security Council having relevance. After all, that is the reason we're here to discuss the ongoing relevance of the Security Council. The resolution to the Syria crisis wasn't, and this was pointed out by the other speaker on my side, wasn't achieved directly through Security Council action, but was indeed achieved as a result of diplomacy on the part of Russia. Secondly, it was mentioned that often international bodies look to the Security Council to provide support. In fact, the actions of Security Council, other international bodies, supports our case. Often, other international bodies disregard the role of the Security Council and intervene unilaterally, and this demonstrates that often they view the Security Council as irrelevant, and Kosovo is a prime example of that. I therefore also regretfully end my submissions. Thank you.
I would like to once again attempt to rebuttal against my colleagues. The resolution of the UN Security Council, once again, you say that it was done exterior to the UN Security Council, but yet haven't provided any legitimacy behind it. So that's where I'm pointing on the legitimacy behind the decision. I haven't heard, obviously, and the lack of credibility behind the argument somewhat illustrates that there's no proof there wasn't a UN Security Council resolution. The UN Security Council, it was clearly stipulated on the 27th of September 2013 that it was a UN Security Council resolution, and that resolution is what ensured that the chemical weapons will be remanded from Syria immediately, and that they would be destroyed in order to prevent such atrocities as witnessed this year. I would like to. That would be the end of my submission.
Thank you very much. Very influential arguments there from both sides once again. So the judges will now tally up their scores. That was the second and final match of the second round. We will now be entering into the final once we have the decisions from the judges. So after a short recess, I will announce the finalists and the topic for round 3.